What we're looking at is the most beautiful oil painting on loan to us by the Getty Museum of California, showing the Adoration of the Magi. This is the moment where three wise men go to visit the newborn Christ child and present gifts to him as the King of Kings. So in the picture on the far left we see Joseph and Mary, the parents of Jesus, the Christ child Jesus, and then the three wise men presenting gifts. This is the most extraordinary painting because it shows right at the heart of the painting and filled with gold coins, one of the most precious gifts that could be presented to the Christ child, which is a piece of early 15th century blue and white porcelain. And this is extraordinary because later on in the 16th or 17th century, blue and white was much more common because you have the direct contact with Portugal and Spain and later on the Dutch and the English, shipping vast quantities of blue and white to Europe. You would never have a 16th century bowl presented to Christ because it was too common. But in the late 15th century, when this was painted, the porcelain from China was still so rare that it only belonged to kings or very special nobles within Europe. And nothing was shipped directly from China to Europe. It all came through Middle Eastern intermediaries. And we can prove through excavations at Yongle that the porcelain shown in the painting is actually an early 15th century piece rather than a piece which would have been contemporary with the painting and made later on perhaps in the Hongzhou period. It is in fact a Yongle period porcelain, and in the exhibition we have a similar piece of blue and white which we're going to display side by side. It's not identical, but it has a very similar profile and pattern. But if we look at later 15th century pieces, they are quite different, and this shape and this pattern is very much an early 15th century design, so it would have been an antique at the time that it was painted. But at the time it was painted, very few goods went directly to Europe. It's only another 20 years later, after the painting was completed, that you have direct trade between the Portuguese and China, and that opens up the whole world to blue and white trade. In the early 15th century, the Emperor of China controls to a large degree production, that most of the production at Jingdezhen is centred around the court, and the court also control exports. Later on in the 15th century, control of exports are relaxed, and so you get private entrepreneurs who are selling wares more widely in Southeast Asia and so on. And then when the Portuguese arrive in the early 16th century, they establish direct trading links with China, and this goes on to the Spanish and then the English and the Dutch. So you have wonderful oil paintings showing Dutch families in their black and white costumes with the black and white tiles, and then with this colourful flash of blue and white, a sort of band of plates that are on a shelf around the top of the room below the ceiling. And it kind of added a whole layer of colour to Europe. It really revolutionised the way people's houses looked and the way people ate. It was something very, very special. But in this time, in the early 15th century, it's just a few court pieces which were maybe presented to people in the Middle East or traded in the Middle East, and then have gently found their way all the way to Europe. And for me, this is a very important exhibit because it'll be the last thing that visitors see before they leave the exhibition. And I want them to know that everything they will have looked at in the exhibition is all before the birth of Columbus in 1451. All of this takes place before Vasco da Gama, before Christopher Columbus sails the oceans. And this painting for me sums that all up. The exotic nature of blue and white in the early 15th century, and that it was suitable as a gift for the King of Kings.